The cruelest thing about losing someone isn't watching them walk away. It's realizing too late that you were the reason they left. The rain tapped softly against the black umbrella above Ethan Sinclair's head, each drop catching the pale glow of the cemetery lights before disappearing into the darkness. Sunday mornings in Boston were usually quiet, but this place felt quieter than the rest of the world, as if grief itself had settled over the rows of white marble and refused to leave. I stood 50 feet away beneath an old oak tree, my hands buried deep inside the pockets of my coat as the cold October wind tugged at loose strands of my hair. Ethan didn't move. He never did. Every Sunday for nearly a year, he came to the same grave with the same bouquet of white roses. Sometimes he stayed 15 minutes, sometimes an hour, but he always came. The billionaire who owned half the skyline. The man whose face appeared on business magazines and financial news channels. The man people described as untouchable. Every week, he stood there looking like someone who had lost the only thing that ever mattered. His shoulders seemed heavier now than they had a year ago. His dark hair was slightly longer. His expensive charcoal coat hung perfectly tailored across his frame, yet somehow he looked smaller than the man I remembered. Sadness does that to people. It shrinks them. The cemetery groundskeeper once told me he never spoke when he visited. Not to anyone, not even to himself. He simply stared at the headstone and left. Today was different. Ethan slowly crouched down, placing the roses carefully at the base of the grave. Then he rested one hand against the cold marble. His lips moved. The distance was too great for me to hear what he said, but I didn't need to. I already knew. I knew because I had imagined that conversation 1,000 times. I knew because I had spent countless nights wondering if regret sounded different when spoken aloud. A sharp gust swept across the cemetery, carrying fallen leaves across the wet grass. Ethan lowered his head. For a moment, he looked completely alone. Not rich, not powerful, not admired, just alone. The kind of loneliness that money couldn't fix. The kind that followed you home and sat beside your bed at 3 a.m. The kind that whispered reminders when the world grew quiet. My chest tightened. I should have left. I should have turned around and walked away before he ever arrived. But I couldn't, because even after everything, some part of me still wanted to know if he remembered. If he thought about the night everything fell apart. If he remembered the family dinners filled with polite smiles and hidden cruelty. If he remembered standing between me and the people who wanted me gone. Most of all, I wondered if he remembered the last thing I said before I disappeared. Ethan finally stood. His hand lingered on the gravestone for one final second before he stepped back. His expression remained unreadable, but the sadness in his eyes was impossible to miss. Then he turned and walked away. Slowly, like a man leaving behind a piece of himself. I waited until his black SUV disappeared through the cemetery gates. Only then did I step forward. The wet grass crunched softly beneath my boots. My heartbeat echoed louder with every step. When I reached the grave, I stared down at the name carved into the marble and felt the familiar ache spread through my chest. Because the woman Ethan Sinclair had spent the last year mourning was supposed to be dead, and I was standing right there looking at her grave. People always say the past stays behind you. That is a lie. The past waits. It sits quietly in the shadows until the moment you think you have finally escaped it. Then it steps back into your life and reminds you who you used to be. 18 months earlier, I was standing in front of a classroom covered in paint stains, helping a group of 8-year-olds turn cardboard boxes into castles. The room smelled like tempera paint and construction paper. Sunlight spilled through the windows, turning floating dust into tiny pieces of gold. It was not glamorous. It was not impressive, but it was mine. I loved every minute of it. My phone buzzed on the corner of my desk for the 3rd time. I ignored it. The 4th time, one of my students pointed at it. "Miss Brooks, somebody really wants to talk to you." A few children giggled. I smiled and finally glanced at the screen. Ethan Sinclair. Just seeing his name made my stomach tighten. We had been dating for 6 months, yet every time he called, I felt the same mixture of excitement and disbelief. Ethan belonged in a world of private jets, boardrooms, and magazine covers. I belonged in a classroom with finger paint on my sleeves. Somehow, against all logic, he kept choosing me. I answered. "Please tell me the city is not on fire," I said. His laugh came through the speaker warm and familiar. "Not today." "Good. I am busy creating future architects." "Then I have terrible news." I smiled despite myself. What is it? There was a brief pause. My mother wants to meet you. The smile disappeared instantly. Around me, children laughed and painted and argued over glitter, while my heart performed an impressive attempt at escape. That does not sound like terrible news, I said carefully. You have never met my mother. I sat down slowly in my chair. Ethan. Emma. The way he said my name told me everything. He was nervous. Ethan Sinclair never sounded nervous. How bad can it be? I asked. Silence. Then another silence. Ethan. Very bad. I covered my eyes with one hand. A student walked past wearing a paper crown and carrying a cardboard dragon. Somehow that made the conversation feel even more surreal. Your family knows about me? I asked. They know enough. And another pause. They have concerns. Concerns. Wealthy people always had elegant words for ugly things. Concerns meant judgment. Concerns meant disapproval. Concerns meant someone had already decided I was not good enough before shaking my hand. You do not have to do this, Ethan said quietly. I can tell them no. I looked out the classroom window. Beyond the playground, the city stretched toward the horizon. Ordinary buildings. Ordinary lives. My life. If we are serious about each other, I have to meet them eventually. Emma. His voice softened. You can still change your mind. The strange thing was that I almost did. Something deep inside me whispered that opening that door would change everything. That some invitations come with invisible consequences. But I pushed the feeling away. What time is dinner? I asked. Ethan exhaled slowly. Not relieved. Not happy. More like a man watching a storm approach from a distance. Saturday. 7 o'clock. I glanced at the children filling the room with laughter and color. I had no idea that one dinner would become the beginning of the end. I only knew that I loved him. And sometimes love convinces you to walk straight toward the thing that will break your heart. Some rooms tell you exactly how welcome you are before anyone says a word. The Sinclair estate sat on a hill overlooking the harbor, its stone walls glowing gold beneath hundreds of carefully placed lights. The house was beautiful in the way museums were beautiful. Perfect. Impressive. Untouchable. As Ethan parked the car beneath the circular driveway, I found myself staring at the enormous windows. Every one of them was illuminated. Every one of them felt like an eye watching my arrival. You still have time to fake a sudden illness, Ethan said as he turned off the engine. I laughed nervously. That bad? His smile appeared for half a second and disappeared just as quickly. Emma, whatever happens in there, remember something. I looked at him. What? I chose you. My heartbeat slowed a little. Not enough, but a little. The front doors opened before we even reached them. A man in a dark suit greeted us with professional politeness and guided us inside. The foyer alone was larger than my entire apartment. Marble floors reflected the crystal chandelier hanging 3 stories above us. Somewhere in the distance, soft piano music floated through the house. Everything smelled faintly of fresh flowers and expensive candles. I suddenly became very aware of my simple navy dress. It had seemed elegant when I bought it. Standing here, it felt painfully ordinary. Voices drifted from the dining room ahead. Then silence. Complete silence. The kind that happens when people stop talking because someone unexpected has entered the room. Ethan placed a reassuring hand against my back. Together, we stepped inside. 10 people sat around a table that looked long enough to host a wedding reception. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath candlelight. Silverware reflected tiny points of gold. Every face turned toward me at once. Some curious, some surprised, some openly disappointed. At the center sat Victoria Sinclair, Ethan's mother. She was beautiful in a way that seemed carefully maintained. Silver blonde hair, perfect posture, a calm expression that revealed absolutely nothing. For 3 seconds, she studied me without speaking. Then she smiled. The smile never reached her eyes. Emma, she said. Welcome. I thanked her and took the seat beside Ethan. Conversation resumed. Or at least an imitation of conversation. Questions came quickly. Where did I grow up? What did my parents do? Where had I attended college? What was my career plan? Each question sounded polite. Each answer seemed to create a new silence. An art teacher, Charlotte Sinclair finally said, lifting her wine glass. Ethan's younger sister smiled pleasantly. How creative. The way she said creative made it sound like a medical condition. I smiled anyway. I enjoy it. Of course. Another smile. Another tiny cut hidden beneath perfect manners. Dinner continued. Stories about business acquisitions, international travel, investment portfolios, private foundations. I contributed when I could, mostly listening, mostly observing, and slowly realizing that nobody here was trying to know me. They were trying to measure me. By dessert, I felt exhausted. Then Victoria set down her fork and looked directly at me. The entire table seemed to pause. "Emma," she said softly, "do you ever find it difficult?" "Difficult? Dating someone whose world is so different from your own." The room became very quiet. Even the piano seemed to disappear. I looked at Ethan. His jaw tightened immediately. But Victoria never took her eyes off me. And for the first time that evening, I understood something important. This dinner had never been an introduction. It had been an evaluation. And I was already failing. There are questions people ask because they want answers. Then there are questions people ask because they already believe they know the answer. Victoria Sinclair's question belonged to the second category. I could feel every pair of eyes at the table waiting for my response. The candles flickered softly between crystal glasses. Somewhere beyond the windows, waves rolled across the harbor. Inside that room, nobody moved. I set my fork down carefully and met Victoria's gaze. "Sometimes," I said honestly, "the worlds are different." Charlotte smiled into her wine glass as if she had just won something. But I continued before anyone else could speak. "The funny thing is that people are usually not as different as they think." A few eyebrows lifted around the table. Victoria remained perfectly composed. "And what do you mean by that?" she asked. "I spend my days with children," I replied. "Some come from wealthy families. Some do not. They all want the same things. To feel safe. To feel valued. To know someone believes in them." Silence followed. Not uncomfortable silence. Surprised silence. Ethan glanced toward me, and for the first time all evening, I saw the corner of his mouth lift slightly. Charlotte's expression did the opposite. Dessert ended shortly afterward. Conversations scattered into smaller groups throughout the house. Guests drifted toward the library, the terrace, and the sitting room. I found myself standing near a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the water. The city lights shimmered across the dark surface like scattered diamonds. For a moment, I could finally breathe. "You survived better than most people do." I turned to find an older man standing beside me. Ethan's uncle, Richard Sinclair. One of the few family members who had barely spoken during dinner. "That sounds encouraging," I said. He chuckled softly. "Trust me, it was." His gaze drifted toward the room behind us. "This family has a habit of testing people." I noticed. "Most fail." Before I could answer, another voice interrupted. "There you are." Charlotte appeared carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. Her smile looked friendly enough. Too friendly. She handed me one of the glasses. "I feel like we got off on the wrong foot." Richard quietly excused himself, leaving us alone. Charlotte watched him walk away before turning back to me. "I hope you understand everyone is simply concerned about Ethan." I nodded politely. "Of course. He has responsibilities most people cannot imagine." Her smile remained fixed. Sometimes feelings can cloud judgment. There it was. The message hidden beneath the manners. "You do not belong here." I took a small sip of water. "Ethan seems capable of making his own decisions." Something flashed behind her eyes. Irritation. Only for a second. Then it vanished. "I suppose we will see." She walked away before I could respond. The strange feeling returned immediately. The same feeling I had experienced before coming here. Like standing near the edge of something invisible. As the evening continued, I noticed whispers. Glances. Conversations that stopped when I approached. Nobody said anything openly cruel. They did not have to. Wealthy families often preferred subtler weapons. By the time Ethan drove me home, the city was asleep beneath a blanket of fog. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, he tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "I am sorry." I stared out the passenger window. "For what?" "For all of it." The streetlights slid across his face in brief flashes of gold and shadow. He looked exhausted. Older somehow. "It was not your fault," I said quietly. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Emma." "What?" His eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead. That was the easy part. Suddenly, my stomach dropped. Because if tonight had been the easy part, I was afraid to discover what came next. The first rumor arrived on a Tuesday morning, disguised as a compliment. I was carrying a stack of student artwork across the community center when Melissa, one of the administrators, stopped me near the front desk. Her smile looked hesitant. "I saw your picture online," she said. "You looked beautiful." I almost dropped the paintings. "My picture." She turned her phone toward me. There I was, standing beside Ethan outside a charity fundraiser we had attended 3 nights earlier. The photograph itself was harmless. The headline underneath was not. Billionaire heir's new romance raises questions. My stomach tightened. Questions about what? Melissa's expression shifted uncomfortably. She handed me the phone. The article never accused me of anything directly. It did not need to. It simply asked clever questions. Where had I come from? How had I met Ethan? Why had he suddenly become serious about someone outside his social circle? Every paragraph hinted at motives without ever stating them. By the time I reached the end, readers were supposed to draw their own conclusions. That I wanted money, influence, access. The comments below were even worse. Complete strangers discussing my character as though they had known me for years. I handed the phone back and forced a smile. People must be bored. Melissa nodded, but neither of us believed that. Throughout the week, more articles appeared. More photographs. More speculation. Nothing openly cruel. Nothing anyone could challenge legally. Just enough doubt planted carefully into the public conversation. Like seeds, waiting to grow. Ethan was furious when he saw them. This is not random, he said one evening while pacing across my apartment living room. Rain tapped softly against the windows behind him. Someone is feeding information to reporters. I sat cross-legged on my couch with my laptop balanced on my knees. Maybe people are simply interested. Ethan stopped walking and stared at me. No. The certainty in his voice surprised me. This is intentional. Deep down, I knew he was right. The timing felt too perfect. The details too specific. Information that should have remained private somehow kept appearing in public. Where I worked. Where I volunteered. Places I visited regularly. Nothing dangerous. Just unsettling. Like someone standing outside a window. Watching. 2 days later, another invitation arrived from the Sinclair family. A charity gala hosted by their foundation. Ethan wanted me there. His mother apparently did too. That alone made me suspicious. The ballroom shimmered beneath hundreds of crystal lights. Wealthy donors filled the room with practiced laughter and polished conversations. I wore a simple emerald dress. Ethan looked impossibly handsome in a dark suit. For the first hour, everything seemed normal. Then I overheard 2 women speaking near the refreshment table. They did not realize I was standing behind them. I heard she used to volunteer at his foundation events before they met. Really, that is what people are saying. A pause. Then a laugh. Interesting strategy. My face burned. Neither woman knew me. Neither bothered turning around. They simply accepted the story because it fit the version of me they preferred to believe. I stepped outside onto the terrace for air. The harbor lights shimmered in the distance. The cold wind felt better than the warmth inside. Footsteps approached behind me. I expected Ethan. Instead, I found Charlotte Sinclair smiling politely beneath the terrace lights. She folded her arms and studied me for a moment. "It is amazing," she said softly, "how quickly people believe a story once they decide they want it to be true." Then she smiled again and walked away, leaving me alone with a sentence that felt far more like a warning than an observation. Some truths arrive quietly. They do not explode into your life. They simply sit beside you one evening and wait until you are finally ready to see them. 3 days after the gala, Ethan showed up at my apartment carrying takeout containers and looking more tired than I had ever seen him. His tie was gone. The top button of his shirt hung open. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a man who had not slept properly in weeks. "Long day?" I asked as he stepped inside. He laughed softly. "Long decade." We ate dinner on my tiny couch while an old baseball game played silently on television. Outside, rain slid down the windows in silver lines. For a while, neither of us mentioned the articles, the rumors, the family. It felt nice pretending those things did not exist. Then Ethan set down his fork and stared at the floor. "My grandfather chose my college." I blinked. "What?" "My major too." He leaned back against the couch cushion. "When I was 18, I wanted to study architecture." I stared at him. "Architecture?" He smiled faintly. Apparently, I was terrible at listening to family expectations. I could not imagine it. The Ethan I knew seemed so confident, so certain. Yet something in his expression told me the story mattered. "What happened?" I asked quietly. He looked toward the rain-covered window. "They explained that my future was not really mine." The room fell silent. "And you listened?" He laughed again. There was no humor in the sound. I was raised to listen. For the next hour, he told me stories I had never heard before. about private schools he had not wanted to attend, career decisions made during family meetings, relationships that ended because they were considered inconvenient. Every story revealed another invisible chain. Not dramatic, not cruel, just constant. Expectations wrapped so tightly around his life that eventually they became normal. By the end, my chest hurt. Ethan. He glanced at me. What? That sounds exhausting. Something shifted in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Nobody had ever said it that way before. Not tragic. Not impressive. Just exhausting. He looked down at his hands. It is. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I understood something that changed everything. I had spent months believing I was the outsider trying to survive his world. But Ethan had been trapped inside that world his entire life. The difference was that he could never leave it. A week later, I attended another Sinclair Foundation event. This time it was a children's literacy fundraiser. Hundreds of guests filled a downtown ballroom. Donors mingled beneath crystal chandeliers, while cameras flashed from every corner. During the presentation, a nervous 10-year-old scholarship recipient froze on stage while attempting to deliver a speech. The room grew uncomfortable. The boy's hands trembled. His eyes filled with panic. Without thinking, I stepped forward from my seat. I knelt beside him and whispered a few encouraging words. The same techniques I used every day with anxious students. Slowly, the boy smiled. Then he finished his speech. The crowd erupted into applause. Relief flooded across his face. I returned to my seat and thought nothing more about it. What I did not realize was that Victoria Sinclair had watched the entire moment from across the room. And for the first time since we met, she was no longer looking at me with disapproval. She was looking at me with something far more dangerous. Interest. The most dangerous people are not the ones who openly oppose you. They are the ones who suddenly become kind. 2 weeks after the literacy fundraiser, Victoria Sinclair invited me to lunch. Not Ethan. Me. Alone. The invitation arrived on expensive cream-colored stationery delivered by courier to the community center. I stared at it for nearly 5 minutes before calling Ethan. Your mother invited me to lunch. Silence. Ethan. Another silence. That is not a good sign. I laughed nervously. That bad? Emma, my mother has spent months pretending you do not exist. If she suddenly wants a private conversation, it means she wants something. The words stayed with me all week. By the time Saturday arrived, my stomach felt like it was full of stones. The restaurant overlooked Boston Harbor. White tablecloths. Fresh flowers. Waiters who somehow appeared the second a glass needed refilling. Victoria was already seated when I arrived. She wore a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Yet her smile seemed warmer than I remembered. Emma, she said. Thank you for coming. For the first 30 minutes, the conversation felt surprisingly normal. We discussed education, community programs, children's literacy. She asked thoughtful questions and listened carefully to my answers. Several times I caught myself relaxing. Maybe I had misjudged her. Maybe she was finally trying to know me. Then the food arrived, and everything changed. Victoria folded her hands together and looked directly at me. You care about Ethan. It was not a question. Yes, I answered. Her expression softened slightly. I believe you do. The statement caught me off guard. Thank you. She nodded once. That is why I asked to meet. Suddenly the air felt heavier. Emma, there are things you do not understand about our family. My chest tightened. Such as, she glanced toward the harbor before returning her attention to me. Sinclair Holdings is preparing for several major transitions. Investors are watching every move Ethan makes. The board is watching. The press is watching. I already knew where this conversation was going. And I am a problem. Victoria did not answer immediately. That silence told me everything. You are not the problem, she said carefully. The perception is. I looked down at my untouched lunch. Somehow it no longer seemed possible to eat. What exactly are you asking me? Her voice remained calm. Gentle even. I am asking you to consider what is best for him. There it was. Not a demand. Not an order. Something far more effective. A request wrapped inside concern. You want me to leave. Victoria's expression never changed. I want Ethan to have every opportunity available to him. I stared at her for several seconds. Then I smiled. Not because I was happy, because suddenly everything made sense. The articles, the whispers, the questions, the constant pressure disguised as politeness. They had never intended to welcome me. They had simply been waiting for me to understand the message on my own. When lunch ended, Victoria stood and reached for her purse. "You are a good woman, Emma." I almost laughed, because for the first time, I realized that being a good woman might be exactly why she believed I would walk away. And as I watched her leave the restaurant, a terrifying thought settled into my chest. What if she was right? The hardest decisions are not the ones you make in anger. They are the ones you make out of love. For 3 days after lunch with Victoria, I carried her words everywhere. Into my classroom, into the grocery store, into the quiet moments before sleep. They followed me like a shadow. I hated that they affected me. I hated even more that part of me understood them. Ethan called every evening. He sounded tired, more distracted than usual. Meetings ran late. Investors wanted updates. Reporters kept asking questions. The pressure around him seemed to grow heavier by the day. Then came Thursday. The community center was nearly empty when my phone buzzed. Ethan's name appeared on the screen. I smiled automatically and answered. "Please tell me you are calling with good news." Silence greeted me. My smile faded. "Ethan." His voice finally came through. Low. Controlled. Too controlled. "I need to see you." An hour later he arrived at my apartment. Rain soaked the shoulders of his coat. He barely seemed to notice. The moment he stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. His eyes looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally, like someone who had spent days fighting a battle nobody else could see. "What happened?" I asked. Ethan loosened his tie and stared at the floor. "The board held an emergency meeting this morning." My stomach tightened. "Why?" He laughed softly. The sound carried no humor. "Apparently my personal life has become a corporate concern." Anger flared instantly inside me. "That is ridiculous." "I agree." He sat on the edge of my couch and rubbed a hand across his face. "Several investors are threatening to withdraw support from a major acquisition." I sat beside him. "Because of me?" Ethan did not answer. That silence hurt more than words. Outside, rain struck the windows in steady waves. Inside, neither of us moved. Finally, he looked at me. "Emma, I am sorry." "Stop apologizing." "No." His voice sharpened. "You do not deserve any of this." For a moment, I saw something I had never seen before. Not frustration. Not stress. Helplessness. Ethan Sinclair could solve almost any problem with enough determination. But this was different. Because the problem was not business. It was people. Family. Expectations. Generations of pressure wrapped around a man who had spent his entire life trying to carry them. My chest ached. "What are you going to do?" I whispered. Ethan stared at me for several long seconds. Then he reached into his coat pocket. My heart stopped. A small velvet box appeared in his hand. Suddenly the entire room felt very still. "I was going to wait until Christmas," he said quietly. My breath caught. Ethan opened the box. A diamond reflected the soft apartment light like captured starlight. Tears immediately filled my eyes. "Ethan." His hand trembled slightly. "I spent years making decisions everyone else wanted." His voice grew softer. "I am done doing that." The world seemed to narrow until only the two of us remained. "Emma Brooks," he said, "will you marry me?" For one beautiful second, nothing else mattered. Not his family, not the board, not the rumors, just us. Then my phone vibrated on the coffee table. Neither of us intended to look, but the screen lit up, and the headline displayed across it turned the air to ice. A new article had just been published. This one was not asking questions anymore. This one was making accusations. The moment joy enters your life is often the exact moment someone tries to take it away. The glowing screen on my coffee table felt impossibly bright in the dim apartment. Ethan reached for the phone first. His expression hardened as he read the headline. Then it hardened even more. I had never seen his eyes look like that. Not angry. Hurt. The article claimed that I had used my position in charitable organizations to gain access to influential donors connected to Sinclair Holdings. It suggested that my relationship with Ethan had been carefully planned long before we ever met. Every accusation was built from half-truths and twisted coincidences. Photographs from public events, volunteer records, old fundraising programs, pieces of ordinary life rearranged into something ugly. "This is a lie," Ethan said quietly. I nodded. My throat felt too tight to speak. He set the phone down and took both my hands. "Look at me." I did. "None of this changes anything." I wanted to believe him. More than anything, I wanted to believe him. But over the next 72 hours, the story spread everywhere. Television commentators discussed it. Financial blogs repeated it. Social media transformed it into entertainment. Complete strangers debated my intentions as though they had known me personally. At school, parents began asking uncomfortable questions. Not accusations, just questions. The kind that carried doubt beneath polite smiles. One afternoon, I walked into the staff lounge and conversation stopped. Not completely, just enough. The tiny pause hurt more than open criticism ever could. Ethan fought back publicly. His company released statements. Lawyers challenged false claims. Interviews were given. Corrections were requested. None of it mattered. Because once people enjoy a story, they rarely want the truth. 1 week later, Ethan called me from New York. His voice sounded exhausted. The board wants another meeting. I closed my eyes. Because of me. Silence answered. Again, that terrible silence. Emma, just tell me. He exhaled slowly. Yes. After the call ended, I sat alone in my apartment listening to traffic outside my window. A siren echoed somewhere in the distance. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Everything felt strangely quiet. For months, I had focused on surviving his family's disapproval. I had never stopped to ask what survival was costing him. The answer was suddenly everywhere. His stress, his exhaustion, the pressure, the constant need to defend us. Defend me. 3 days later, I attended a board-sponsored charity luncheon. I had almost declined. Then I noticed something strange. During a conversation near the entrance, 2 executives mentioned a confidential proposal involving one of Sinclair Holdings' largest acquisitions. The details sounded familiar. Too familiar. Later that evening, while reading through public reports online, I discovered discrepancies. Small ones. Numbers that did not match. Timelines that overlapped incorrectly. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to make me uneasy. The more I looked, the more concerned I became. By midnight, I realized something important. Someone inside Sinclair Holdings was feeding information to the press. Not just about me. About the company itself. The rumors surrounding my relationship were only part of something much larger. My pulse raced as I stared at the documents spread across my dining table. I should have called Ethan immediately. Instead, I looked at the engagement ring resting beside my coffee mug and felt a deep sadness settle over me. Because for the first time, I understood exactly what Victoria Sinclair had been counting on. She believed I loved Ethan enough to leave. And the terrifying part was that she might have been right. Sometimes the person who breaks their own heart believes they are saving someone else's. I spent the next 4 days living inside a decision I could not stop thinking about. Every morning, I told myself I would call Ethan and explain everything I had discovered. Every evening, I found another reason to wait. The documents on my dining table continued to grow. Financial reports, public filings, press timelines. None of them proved anything by themselves. But together they painted a troubling picture. Someone was benefiting from the chaos surrounding Sinclair Holdings. Someone wanted attention focused on me while larger problems remained hidden. The realization should have pushed me toward Ethan. Instead, it pushed me further away. Because every new discovery seemed to create more pressure around his life. More scrutiny. More expectations. One rainy Tuesday, I left school later than usual. As I stepped into the parking lot, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Sinclair Holdings shares fall after investor concerns. I stared at the headline while cold rain soaked my coat. The article mentioned uncertainty surrounding leadership decisions, future acquisitions, public perception. None of it directly blamed me. Yet I could already imagine the conversations happening behind closed doors. The whispers, the assumptions. By the time I reached my apartment, I felt exhausted. Ethan called 20 minutes later. I watched his name glow across the screen. My chest tightened immediately. I knew the sound of his voice would weaken every ounce of determination I had left. So I let it ring. Then ring again. Then stop. 5 minutes later he called back. This time I answered. Emma. Relief flooded through his voice so quickly it hurt. I have been trying to reach you all day. I closed my eyes. I know. Are you okay? The simple question nearly broke me. I am fine. He was silent for a moment. That was not a convincing answer. Despite everything, I smiled. Ethan always knew when I was lying. I miss you, he said quietly. The words settled heavily inside my chest. I walked toward the window and watched headlights move through the rain below. Ethan. What? My fingers tightened around the phone. Have you ever wondered what your life would look like without all this? Another silence. Without what? Without fighting. I heard him exhale slowly. Emma. His voice softened. What is this really about? I could not answer. Because if I started talking, I might tell him everything. About the documents. The pressure. The growing certainty that staying beside him was making his life harder. And if I told him that, he would never let me go. After we ended the call, I sat alone in the dark for nearly 2 hours. Then I opened my laptop. By midnight, I had submitted my resignation from the community center. By 1 in the morning, I had accepted a temporary education fellowship in a small coastal town nearly 200 miles away. By 2, I had packed a suitcase. Dawn arrived gray and quiet. I left the engagement ring inside its velvet box on the kitchen table beside a letter addressed to Ethan. Then I closed the apartment door behind me. As the bus pulled away from Boston, rain streaked across the window like tears. My phone vibrated continuously in my pocket. Calls, messages, voicemails. I could not bring myself to look at any of them. Somewhere behind me, Ethan Sinclair was waking up to discover I was gone. And for the first time since I met him, I had absolutely no idea if I would ever see him again. People imagine heartbreak as a dramatic moment, a slammed door, a final argument, a goodbye. The truth is often much quieter. 3 months after I left Boston, the ocean had become part of my daily routine. The small coastal town of Harbor Point sat between rocky cliffs and endless gray water. Most mornings began with seabirds crying overhead and fishing boats disappearing into the fog. The fellowship program kept me busy. I worked with children from struggling families. I taught our classes, organized literacy projects, smiled when people asked where I came from. Slowly, I learned how to exist without checking my phone every 5 minutes. At least that was the lie I told myself. The truth was that I still thought about Ethan every day. I wondered if he hated me, wondered if he understood, wondered if leaving had actually helped him at all. One rainy afternoon, I was sorting donated books when a familiar name flashed across a television mounted near the community center reception desk. Sinclair Holdings. My stomach immediately tightened. The news anchor spoke quickly. Market uncertainty. Executive investigations. Internal reviews. Then came something unexpected. A senior executive had resigned after evidence emerged linking him to confidential information leaks involving both company operations and media outlets. I froze. Books slipped from my hands onto the floor. The receptionist glanced toward the television. "Big scandal," she said casually. Apparently somebody inside the company was feeding stories to reporters for months. My pulse began racing. Suddenly, every document I had studied at my dining table made sense. Every inconsistency, every strange timeline. Someone had manipulated the situation from the inside. Someone had benefited from the chaos surrounding both the company and my relationship with Ethan. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. "Hello." Silence greeted me. Then a familiar voice. "Emma." My heart stopped. Ethan. 3 months vanished instantly. Every mile. Every excuse. Every attempt to move forward. Gone. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. "How did you find me?" I whispered. A soft laugh came through the line. "Tired. Familiar. You underestimate how stubborn I am." Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. "Ethan, do not." His voice cracked slightly. "Do not apologize yet." I pressed a hand against my mouth. Outside, rain tapped against the community center windows. Children laughed somewhere down the hallway. The ordinary sounds made the moment feel unreal. "I read your letter 100 times," he said quietly. "Maybe more." My eyes closed. I thought I was helping. "I know." The sadness in his voice hurt more than anger ever could. Then he exhaled slowly. "Emma, there is something you need to know." I waited. "You were right." My chest tightened. "About what?" Another pause. Someone inside the company was responsible. I sank into the nearest chair. Ethan continued speaking. And the person who uncovered the evidence was not one of our investigators. My heartbeat echoed loudly in my ears. "Who was it?" Silence stretched across the line. Then Ethan answered. "You were." Some people spend years searching for the truth only to discover it was standing in front of them the entire time. I could not speak after Ethan's words. The community center around me seemed to disappear. The voices, the footsteps, the rain against the windows. Everything faded into the background. "What do you mean?" I finally whispered. Ethan exhaled slowly. "After you left, I found copies of the notes you were making." My eyes closed. The documents, the timelines, the observations I had never shown anyone. I was angry when I first found them, he admitted. I thought you had been investigating the company because you did not trust me. The sadness in his voice twisted something inside my chest. Then I kept reading. I lowered my head. Ethan, Emma, you connected details our entire legal team missed. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he continued. The executive responsible for the leaks resigned 2 weeks ago. The board completed its review. The false stories were traced back through multiple sources. Everything unraveled. Outside, a distant foghorn echoed across the harbor. The sound felt strangely appropriate, like something clearing through the mist. What happened after that? I asked quietly. Ethan laughed softly. Chaos. Despite everything, I smiled. That sounds accurate. His tone became more serious. There is something else you should know. My stomach tightened. What? Another pause. My mother asked to see me. I stared out the rain-covered window. For months, Victoria Sinclair had represented every obstacle between us. Every judgment. Every doubt. Every carefully delivered warning. And I asked. Ethan was silent long enough that I almost repeated the question. Then he answered. She apologized. I froze. What? I know. His voice carried the same disbelief I felt. I thought I misheard her too. The image was almost impossible to imagine. Victoria Sinclair admitting she was wrong. What did she say? Ethan exhaled slowly. She said she spent so much time worrying about protecting the family that she forgot what kind of person deserved to be part of it. Tears filled my eyes unexpectedly. Not because the words fixed anything. They did not. Some wounds remained long after apologies arrived. But because I knew how difficult those words must have been for her. There is more, Ethan said quietly. Charlotte knows the truth too. My eyes widened. Charlotte. Apparently reality has been very inconvenient for her lately. A small laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Ethan laughed too. The sound felt familiar. Warm. Like sunlight after months of gray skies. For the first time since leaving Boston, the distance between us felt smaller. Not gone, but smaller. Then his voice softened again. Emma. My heartbeat quickened instantly. Yes. I spent 3 months trying to understand why you left. I swallowed hard. And the silence that followed felt fragile. Important. Now I understand why. My chest tightened. But understanding does not mean I wanted you to go. Tears slipped quietly down my cheeks. Outside, the rain continued falling over Harbor Point. Inside, I finally realized something I should have understood months ago. Leaving had never saved Ethan. It had only hurt both of us. And for the first time since I boarded that bus, I found myself wondering if some stories were not meant to end with goodbye. Some people believe love survives because 2 people hold on. I think love survives because eventually someone finds the courage to come back. 3 days after my conversation with Ethan, the rain finally stopped. Harbor Point woke beneath a clear blue sky for the first time in weeks. The ocean sparkled beyond the community center windows. Children filled the art room with laughter and paint-stained hands. Everything looked ordinary, which is probably why I never expected to see him standing there. I was carrying a box of supplies across the parking lot when a familiar black SUV pulled into view. My heart stopped instantly. The vehicle parked. The driver's door opened, and Ethan stepped out. For a moment, neither of us moved. The world seemed to slow around us. The wind coming off the water lifted his dark hair. Sunlight reflected off the harbor behind him. 3 months disappeared in a single heartbeat. He looked different. Not older. Lighter somehow. Like someone who had finally put down a weight he had been carrying for years. I set the box down without taking my eyes off him. Ethan smiled first. A small smile. Careful. Uncertain. As though he was afraid I might vanish if he moved too quickly. Hi, he said. The word nearly made me cry. Hi, I answered. We stood there staring at each other like 2 people relearning how to breathe. Finally, Ethan walked closer. Not rushing. Not demanding. Just closing the distance one step at a time. You found me, I whispered. He laughed softly. I told you I was stubborn. Tears filled my eyes. You flew 200 miles for that joke? Actually, I flew 200 miles because I love you. The words settled gently between us. No audience. No reporters. No family expectations. Just truth. For several seconds I could not speak. Then I looked down. I never stopped loving you either. Relief flashed across his face so quickly it hurt to see. Ethan stepped closer. Good. I laughed through my tears. Good. Good, he repeated. Because I am tired of spending my Sundays talking to a gravestone. My breath caught. The cemetery. The memorial. The empty grave carrying my name. Ethan smiled sadly. You really thought disappearing would make me forget you? I shook my head. No. Then why did you do it? The question deserved honesty. Because I thought losing me would make your life easier. Ethan stared at me for several long seconds. Then he gently took my hands. Emma, losing you was the hardest thing that ever happened to me. Tears slipped down my cheeks. This time I did not hide them. Neither did he. The ocean breeze moved softly around us. Somewhere nearby, children laughed. Life continued exactly as it always had. Yet everything felt different. Ethan reached into his coat pocket. My eyes widened immediately. You carried that thing all the way here. He smiled. Every day for 3 months. The small velvet box opened between us once again. Sunlight caught the diamond. But this time there were no headlines waiting to interrupt us. No rumors. No expectations. Only a choice. Our choice. Emma Brooks. Ethan said quietly. Will you come home with me? I smiled through tears and squeezed his hands. Yes. Sometimes the people who doubt your worth teach you something valuable. They teach you never to measure yourself through someone else's approval. And sometimes the people who truly love you spend months proving one simple truth. Home is not a place. It is the person who never stopped looking for you.